Welcome to the Huntley Leadership Podcast, helping leaders be a positive catalyst in the people they support, the organizations they serve, and the communities they live. This podcast will make you think, laugh, and grit your teeth with new determination to make your parish or business a place of transformation, passion, and purpose. If you're still breathing, you are powered for impact. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Huntley Leadership Podcast. I'm your host today, Ron Huntley. I'm so blessed to have with me today the CEO of Catholic Leadership Institute, Dan Cellucci. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Ron, thanks so much for having me. It's a great privilege.
It's going to be a fun conversation.
I think
the whole idea of Catholic Leadership Institute, for all of our guests listening, let that sink in for a minute. Because as we all know, leadership is, everything rises and falls on leadership. And it's something that I think as we get better at, everybody wins. And so I'm really excited to open up this conversation about leadership and about this organization, what they've done, what they're seeing. But let's just start, Dan, by, for those people who might not be aware of Catholic Leadership Institute, tell us a little bit about the organization.
Sure. Well, we are a lay association of the faithful, a nonprofit ministry located in the United States primarily. We have people all across the country, and most of our ministry is in the U.S., a little bit in Canada. Occasionally I get to go over to Rome, which is fun. But we exist on a simple principle for the last almost 35 years, which is that God gives each of us potential, and our gift to God is how we use it. And so we are each created for a purpose, and our life's call is to discern that purpose and put all of those gifts and talents back at the feet of our Lord. And so where that has taken us over the last 3 decades has been everything from helping young adults understand their purpose. When we started as a mostly volunteer organization for the first 10 years, and that's how I got involved. I heard that call, had that encounter on a CLI weekend for young adults. And now 20 years later, we are blessed to be working with hundreds of parishes, dioceses, bishops, helping them reconnect to their call, helping them identify those gifts and talents that they have, helping them cast vision for their local churches, and helping them call forth the gifts and talents of others. So we do that a lot of different ways. We have different ongoing formation opportunities for clergy and lay leaders. We have some thought leadership that we're trying to do more of, which is why I'm so grateful to be on this podcast. And we have different tools and models that we develop. And then we have some consulting and facilitation services to help mostly bishops at the diocesan level with various different projects. So that's kind of this chapter that we're in, but it's been a wonderful ride over the last 20 years.
I didn't realize, it's really fun for me to hear that in the beginning, you were putting on events for young people to help them discover their gifts and their call. I had no idea.
Yeah, first 10 years, our founder, Tim Flanagan, businessman in the United States, felt this call to bring leadership training to the Catholic Church. He had seen it in corporate America. He'd seen it in the military and his service there. And he thought, why not the church? And so he started, knocking on doors and found a priest in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, which is where I'm from, who was willing to help him kind of navigate the church and figure out how to help this business guy do this. And at the time, that priest, Father Chuck Pfeffer, was in charge of young adult ministry in the Archdiocese and trying to build young adult leaders. So that's really how we got our start. And again, how I got my start in this ministry. So
I always find it beautiful when lay Catholic people who have a passion and skills and gifts try to say, well, what is it that I can do to apply this to our church to make our church even more effective? I love that stirring that comes in people's lives from time to time. It's so beautiful, eh?
Yeah. Tim's story is a great one. He's now 82, I think, 82 years old, but he was really at the top of his game from a business standpoint. And he went on a leadership retreat for executives in Pecos River, New Mexico. And literally, Ron was thrown from his horse while he was horseback riding. And as
literally
thrown from his horse, a la St. Paul. And as he was waiting for help, he's just laying there. As he's waiting for help, the way he describes it is he just felt this call. And so the next day on this retreat, as part of this, they asked all these executives to write down their personal mission statement. And he describes it as like the words just came out of the pen to bring the best in leadership development to the Catholic Church. And from there, kind of his journey was set.
Wow.
And even to this day, he's still very active. I can barely keep up with him. So we're really blessed to have his witness of leadership.
Two of my mentors are in their 80s, and I think to myself, if I have half of their energy now, I'd be
Yeah.
twice as effective. They just
Yeah.
have such vision, such passion. They're in their 80s, and they're just running to the finish line, man. They're sprinting to the finish line. I
Well,
love people
and
like that.
oh my gosh! And what's beautiful about Tim, in the best sense, most people don't know who he is.
Yeah,
He has this spirit of humility that I crave and wish I had and aspired to have one day. But he really, it's never been about him. It's always
yeah.
been about the Lord, always been about the church, always been about bringing
Mm,
out the potential of others.
mm,
And so I think it's just a best in class example of a leader who is really about the mission and not about
hmm.
himself.
Yeah,
And I try to aspire to that every day. So,
amen. It's wonderful that we have role models like that in our
amen.
lives that can show us the way. And that's just so beautiful. Something you said a little bit earlier when you're talking about the type of work that you guys do and did and how it evolved, the CLI, you said, we help people cast vision and then we help people draw out the gifts of others. How big a role does vision have in helping people draw out the best in others?
Well, I mean, Proverbs, right? Where there is no vision, the people perish. We like
Mhm.
to say, where there is vision, people perish. And so, um, little Catholic joke for you on
Yeah,
the
that's
podcast today. But no, I think it's really important. Look, the reality is leadership is hard,
yeah.
and followership is hard, discipleship is hard. And so, if we're really answering the call to discipleship, we're making sacrifices, we're making choices.
Mm,
And so I think it's really hard for people to make a choice, make a sacrifice, and leave an old way behind if they don't know what
mm,
they're going toward, right? And
yeah.
so I think the role as of leaders, any leader in any organization or context, but especially in a faith community, is to show people, yeah, we're going to leave this behind, what we know, what we're comfortable with,
Yeah.
but we're going to go to something that we're being called to, and they have to help paint that picture as best as they can and
Mm,
help people be a part of painting that picture so it's a mutually shared vision. So I think it's absolutely critical, and it's an essential ingredient in any type of form of leadership, but certainly in the faith communities that we serve.
I was just on a call this morning and they were struggling with, as most parishes struggle with, getting more people engaged in service. And one of the things that you just said, I thought so important is that, when it comes to discipleship, we're asking people to sacrifice. We're asking people to make choices, to sacrifice
Yeah.
in order to get involved, to make something happen versus volunteer, right? Like, hey, why don't you give a little bit of time back and, probably be the right thing to do. It's your turn to give a little bit. Like, it's like, those are two totally different paradigms.
It's such a great observation. And I would say, Ron, even for myself, like I've just come to realize it in the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. So like, how long has it taken me to kind of open my eyes to this? But, just saying like, we got to get people engaged so we can keep this thing going is not a vision. That's not a, like, and while yes, we have certain rights and opportunities as baptized Catholics to have a faith community, it's not about us. It's about what he wants for us, and
Amen.
that is a much bigger question. If we're not asking that question and then discerning what we need to do, right? I think we're missing a big piece. Then we're just kind of maintaining this. Like I like to say, a lot of our Catholic parishes, at least in the United States,
Mhm.
like in some cases, are glorified over 55 communities for Catholic adults. Like
Right?
they
It's
got
a
a lot of
club.
great activities. Like we
Yeah.
like people there. We pay some dues, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, it's so much bigger than that.
Mm.
But again, that's an awakening that I think we're all coming to. Again, myself in the last decade or so of my own faith journey,
Yeah.
just realizing that. So yeah, I think it's so much more than, as you said, engagement and
Right.
helping out. It's
And
it's
yeah,
it's
like
call.
here's my vision. We have problems. I need you to help me solve them.
Right. Yeah.
Go. Like,
Yeah.
it's like
Right.
that's
Right.
that's you've inspired nobody. You maybe guilted a few people, but you've inspired nobody. And vision inspires, doesn't it? And for some people that doesn't come easy. Like, how have you helped? Like, what have you seen in terms, like, it's one thing to say you should have a vision, but some people, boy, they can't stop dreaming, and other people have never dreamed. Don't you
Right.
find?
Yeah, and I think we also make the mistake. I know I've made it in my own leadership role that because we cast this wonderful vision, or we feel called to share this wonderful, like everybody's going to be excited about it. And it's like, no, I mean, I'm like binge watching The Chosen with my family recently. And so we just watched the scene where Jesus talks about that, in some cases he came and there will be division. Like there will be people who will not want to go. And so I think that's the inconvenient truth. Like we love to talk about vision on podcasts and how important it is to us leadership junkies. But like it's hard. Like, there's like that's vision, that crucifix in the background, right? Like, I mean, that's a call that doesn't look fun or easy. And so I think everybody's like, well, wait a second. If everybody's not happy and this isn't fun, it must be something wrong. And it's like, no, that's actually people in many cases, people's reaction to change. Yeah. And you can help walk them through it. But some people may not go. And that's a reality too. I think we have to be, conscious of.
One of the things,
and I feel like your experience in the, your journey with parish life, like I think you've seen that kind of firsthand, right? Yeah. That it's beautiful to have a vision, but the implications of casting that vision are serious. I mean, there's stuff at stake, right?
There is, and it might not seem it at first, because oftentimes, vision is often most exciting when what we're leaving is terrible. Like people were really excited to leave 400 years of slavery. It's like, I didn't think we could, but now that we can, this is so great for a while. And so I often, what we've identified as kind of 5 phases of missional momentum. And the first one is just getting started, which includes casting a vision and gathering a team. The second phase is early wins. It's like, this is awesome. This isn't as hard as I thought it was. Like, we're great. I'm invincible. There's nothing I can't do. And then the third phase is the danger zone. And that's when there is pushback, and it's legitimate pushback. And it's pushback from people you care about, who you thought were on board. And some of that's your staff. Some of it's your leadership team. Some of it's your most generous donors. It's like, now what am I going to do? And I think you're right. I don't think anything significant happens until you lead through the danger zone.
Yep. And no, I think that's it. I think if you, I like to say especially when I'm talking to priests, is like, look, the better you lead, the harder it gets. And they're like, this one guy was like, really? Like, he's like, that's just depressing. And I was like, yeah, it is kind of depressing, but it's true. I mean, I think if everything feels smooth, you're probably not coming close to what God's calling you to.
No.
And it's just, I think that's just the reality that I've learned. Anything that is significant in this journey of faith is not going to be easy. It's not going to be without its challenges. And so, casting vision is kind of the fun part, and then but leading people through that danger zone, I think is where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause the sacrifices, like, missional parishes will lay down their preferences at the feet of mission. But boy, when my preferences are being ruffled and then boy, it's like, what am I going to, how do I deal with my own frustration, my own anger, my own disappointment, my own resistance as a parishioner or as a staff member? It's like, those are tricky things. And so many churches don't really have any structure. It's like you got all these groups and you got Father, and everybody goes to Father. And of course you got your secretary, and you might have an assistant, or, it's just like, we don't have these structures that are mobilized to cast vision, to solve problems, to confront, division, to get unanimity of vision. And therefore, to your point, I think one of the things with a great vision is going to do is going to show you all the other things you don't have.
Right. Yeah. And I think the other challenge, I'm curious if this is, I think it's probably true in Canada, but you would know better. And it's certainly true in the United States. I think we have a very strong rights-based mentality, and that rights-based mentality creeps into our faith communities. And so we're constant, and I think for the last 50 years of Catholicism, we kind of have these expectations around what our parish community should do. And it's kind of this like Wizard of Oz. Yeah, Father and whoever else is behind the curtain should be doing all these things, right, if we want them. And so I think we have to flip, as we kind of move into this more disruptive period of time in the church. I think we got to lead with responsibility, rights come with responsibility. And so, yeah, we have some rights, but we have to lead with the responsibility that we're called to as members of the faith community, versus kind of what we think we're owed, or the expectations we've had that are not going to be able to be the same, I think, going forward, and nor maybe should they.
Yeah, that's a good point. What do you think rallies a diocese or a parish? What have you seen rally people so that they start to get some momentum? Like, what is it that, because it's hard.
Yeah, I think, I don't know about you. I'd be curious your take on that. I have found, and one of the things we try to do in our ministry is to speak truth with love. And so we don't try to like shame or berate people, but we do try to lift up some realities that we get to see at least at a national level or local level in a different diocese, and try to have people kind of encounter that truth so that we can kind of say, like, look, it's okay. Like it's a constant journey. Like, we're a pilgrim people. There's hope if we walk forward. But we have to kind of recognize where we're starting from. And if we don't recognize where we're starting from, we really don't know where we're going. My Archbishop always likes to say, like, when you get in your car and you put in an address in that GPS or your iPhone, like, it's calculating it based off where you are, not as well as where you want to go. But if you can't be honest about where you are, I think it's really hard to get to where you want to go. We do a survey of parishes, and the parishes get feedback on everything from hospitality to preaching to all this type of stuff. And I had this one lay leader call me. He was kind of the point of contact for his parish, and he like called me in a whisper, and he's like, Dan, I need to talk to you. And I was like, what's going on, Steve, or whatever? And he's like, there's a problem. And he's like, everybody on the survey said that Father's homilies are terrible. And I was like, okay. I said, are they terrible? He's like, oh yeah, they're god awful. And I was like, okay. And I said, so what's the problem, Steve? He's like, well, we can't share this at the parish council meeting.
Don't want to hurt his feelings.
And I was like, well, Steve, but everybody knows. If everybody in the parish, and he goes, everybody but Father.
Yeah.
And I said, well, has anybody ever given Father the benefit or gift of feedback in a charitable, helpful way, in a relationship of trust and co-responsibility, versus writing an angry letter anonymously or whatever? And I said, no, probably not. So, like, poor Father, like, okay, maybe his gift is not preaching, but like nobody's even helped him try to do that, because they can't. So I think we don't want to confront those type of small truths. And I think if we don't kind of bring that small truth to the table, we can't talk about the big truth, the capital T, and so, and what that requires.
Beautiful. I've heard it said one time, Dan, I thought it was so funny. I just heard it recently. I thought, oh, that's so good. It's two different ways of tackling something. Dan, I'm going to tell you the truth because I love you. And there's the other way. Dan, I'm not going to tell you the truth because I love you. Both of those can come from a very nice place. But if we're going to go on mission, if we're going to be effective, if we're going to be fruitful, then we're probably going to need to tell the truth with love, like you said.
And so, I think particularly in an environment where just society's not with us, like, we're not going in the same current, and so I think you could get away with some of that, like, everybody's polite, nobody says anything, type of, like, we just kind of carry on when everything else was pushing in the same direction, but that's not where we are. And so that doesn't mean we should be jerks. It means we should really love the person to say what is best for this person. And even if that makes me feel uncomfortable, like, I'm going to initiate that conversation.
Yeah. Well, and those are life-giving relationships. And I know one of the things that coaching's really helped people do is have, like, and I'm sure I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this, but is to teach them how to have real conversations with clergy. Like, it's almost like we get really weird around clergy. I used to be in the pharmaceutical industry, Dan, and one of the things that used to crack me up, we had some very solid data on compliance, medication compliance. And so you go into a doctor, so, hey, Dr. Dan, I've been reading this information that says only 32% of people comply with their prescriptions they get from their doctor. What do you think of that? Oh, it's absolutely true. It's probably lower than that. Okay, so how do you deal with it? Oh, that's not my problem. I'm closer to 90%. So every doctor thinks they're at 90%, but would agree that 32 is the right number or lower. And so it's like, so your patients are lying to you and you're believing them. And so there's this disconnect between reality and and their experience. And sometimes that happens with clergy. Like people get around the clergy, and that includes bishops. I've been in meetings begging people to be honest with their bishop, but it's almost like they can't.
No, I know. We see it all the time. And I even had one bishop, we had this, I don't know, committee of whatever, and we were sitting around, titans of industry in this local place, sitting around, there to give advice, and they're saying things, but it's not going beneath the surface of everything.
Yeah.
And the meeting adjourns, and everybody walks out, and the bishop said, "Could you hang out for a second?" And I said, "Sure." And he just sat down. He said, "Could you tell me what they really say about me?"
Oh,
And I was like,
heart.
yeah,
That
it's like, it broke my heart. And I was like, yes. And there were some good things and there were some opportunities, but he knew that they weren't being honest with him. And he could tell. And again, we try in our ministry to bring that out in those conversations,
I do too.
but I see it countless times, and I don't, I'm sure there's lots of different places where it comes from, but it's just not helpful right now. Like we just need to kind of work on this together.
Because it takes courage, doesn't it? Like it takes leadership courage as people surrounding a priest or a bishop to get to that place. And I think that needs to be our goal. Get to that place where we can have honest conversations so we can give accurate GPS instructions, right? Where we're at, where we're going.
And I think it takes a runway of relationship and trust, Ron. Like I think it's really hard, even if you come at it charitably, even if this is the first conversation you're having with someone and you don't know anything about them, that's just a hard place to start. And
that's a terrible place to start.
Yeah. I mean, it's just not going to go well.
No, it's not going to go well.
So I think, and that, I think that's an interesting dynamic too. I think for a long time, our clergy, just because of numbers or whatever, have been kind of isolated from us. Yeah. I think that the strong ones kind of put themselves into our lives, and we hopefully open our homes and open our families to having them. But I think there was probably a point where they kind of separated a little bit to protect themselves, to protect the church, whatever it might be, their formation. And I think that creates that chasm that you don't have as much maybe interpersonal relationship where you can offer those pieces of feedback or observations. So I just know, I mean, I think, we have families. I can't go through a day without getting feedback from my children. So like whether I want it or not, right? Like it's coming. And so, and I think that is helpful because I don't have a choice but to kind of take it, like sit with it. I don't always accept it. But I think about it. And so it's like a daily reality for me, and it's helpful, keeps me grounded. Yeah. And I think that's just an advantage that our clergy don't have. They have some others in their life, but they don't have that constant feedback loop.
That's why I love, in the coaching that I've done over the years, one of the stipulations, like we will coach one, if you still have passion, think God can do something, because if you're depending on me to do it, we're all in trouble. So either we're both putting our hope in God or this isn't going to work. That's right. But the other thing too is that you're willing to lead out of a team. And so I do all my coaching with the pastor and his team. Like I'll do some individual stuff, but a lot of it is with the team because I want to help them learn how to be highly functional together as a team, so that the trust grows, the relationships grows, the ability to deal with conflict grows, to wade into difficult situations grows, because that robustness, that healthiness, it can be tricky at times, but that's the messiness of life. That's the beauty of life. And that's that feedback loop that so many of them maybe don't quite have the way that would help them be better. But they have to want that. They have to be willing to have that, don't they?
Yeah, and I also think we have to be conscious of the fact, because I'm very impatient. I pray for patience daily is the virtue that I need. But I can get very impatient with them. And then I have to remember, I had the blessing of starting as a 19-year-old in getting leadership formation. I have a blessing of a really great board, a really great team, mentors like my predecessor, Matt, like people who just helped me grow in that. And I think for our priests, if the average age is 59, 60, they were formed in a model that no longer exists. They're increasingly isolated in how they're assigned. There's really no, again, feedback along the way, that's any type of like intentional effort. So to have them wake up at 60 and say you should be leading out a team and you should be open to feedback, and like that's a big adjustment, right? And so
Yeah.
we have to have some patience and realize sometimes it's not that they don't want it, it's just a really hard shift to make
Yes.
after you've been leading a certain way for a number of decades, right?
100% is. 100% is. And you know what I find fun about that, and you use the number 60. Uh, what's so fun about it is I find those people are often very teachable because they've had enough of life
Yes.
behind them. Like if they still have passion and faith in Christ, they have a lot of experience and they've probably watched things not work as well as they would have hoped. And so I find there's this sweet spot of humility, experience, and
Yep.
desire. It's like this is the, and I'm not so sure 60 is not a reasonable number. I find the young guys love them, full of vim and vinegar. Hard, not always easy to teach because
Yeah.
they want to try the things that they know are going to work, and so it's like, go ahead, young bull, like go have at her.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a while before they'll realize, and maybe they'll be wildly successful, and that's my hope for all of them. And maybe at some point they'll realize this isn't working quite as well as I thought it was going to. Maybe there's more to this than meets the eye, in which case that's a wonderful place to begin to learn, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I always say, like, in the kind of journey of priesthood that we get to kind of walk with, right? Like I always say, like sometimes the seminarians are the most challenging because they've got all sorts of ideas around what's it going to be like.
Yeah.
And then to your point, like I think younger priests have a great passion. I do have seen a really positive shift in their kind of, and I think it might be the landscape in which they're choosing to enter the priesthood
Yes.
now. They are a little bit more open to it than maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But then I actually find, the people who I enjoy spending the time with the most are the bishops. Everybody's always like, oh, the bishop's
Right.
open to, I'm like, they're super open because it's like
It's
the
true.
hardest job in the
Oh,
world.
number one
And
hardest job.
and generally they're like the only bishop in their diocese or whatever
Yeah.
for miles and miles around. And yes, they have friendships with other bishops and stuff, but it's hard. Like that's just a
Yeah.
hard job. So I find them always really open to like, yeah, please tell me, help me,
Right.
and so yeah, I think you're right. I think that's true of human beings, right?
Yes.
I
Yes.
thought I deserved the corner office as soon as I graduated college, and I was going to fix the church, overnight.
Yeah.
So I am a little bit maybe wiser with some gray hair, or just have stepped on enough landmines myself, that I could realize that there's a little bit more to it that has nothing to do with Dan Cellucci, right?
So
So
true.
don't tell my wife
We,
that. But
we play such a small part, right? It's an important part, but it's a small part. And I think our mistakes are fuel for wisdom and growing. I
yeah,
love that. One of the things I just want to crack open, Dan, and get some perspective on from you, if that's okay. So many churches and dioceses have been struggling. If I can just state some of the obvious is, less vocations in a lot of places, which makes it
yep,
harder. A lot of times, priests are put in situations where they're overseeing multiple sites, multiple parishes, and that's tricky and that's hard. And sometimes the giving is decreased, and so we don't have as much resources to deal with the infrastructure. And then we have hospitals and schools, and that, like, I go into the fetal position when I think of all of the factors that are at play
yep,
financially, legally, uh, you know canon law wise. Like there's a lot going
yeah,
on in terms of the structure in any given diocese, and when the infrastructure's needs exceed resources, that must be scary, and people can often see it coming for years before it goes off the cliff. And some people wait till it goes off the cliff, some people are proactive, although I'd be interesting to find out how many people are proactive. But there's probably that spot where like, oh, we're in trouble, we need help. And to be honest with you, I always think of you guys. Like I always think, well, call CLI. Like I don't know who else could even do that work. And
yeah.
maybe there's other people, but that's how one of the big roles I see you guys play in supporting the church. Is that? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I think we look at that those types of situations. When you're looking at parishes and whatnot, that's probably about, I don't know, 10 to 15% of overall what we're doing in any given year. Generally,
Mm,
the role we're playing though is to try to facilitate, as you said, really difficult, complex conversations.
mm,
Making sure my biggest goal is to make sure that the people of God understand and have the opportunity to be a part of casting vision and being a part of a future. Here's what the tragedy to me, Ron.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have a sense of what it looks like or what's happening, but actually many of us are not very familiar or conversant in what it takes to make our parishes work. I mean, I think if you asked even the most active Catholics, engaged Catholics participating in ministries in their parish, if you ask them, what's your annual budget as a parish? I bet you most could not answer it. If you said, what, like, uh, and then we have this natural human reality of NIMBY, not in my backyard. So it's, Bishop, you should change, yes, you should look at this and do something. And then, well, but don't touch my parish, or don't come to me, so there's a lot of human realities, right? And understanding. And so we always are trying to help to facilitate that understanding and bring people along in the fact that we don't exist for the infrastructure. The infrastructure is a means of glorifying God. And when it stops glorifying God because it becomes the God, I mean, when we care more about the building, as sacred as it is, than we do than our relationship with Jesus and each other, that's a problem. So but that's a journey too. We can't just expect people to kind of get that overnight. We have to help them understand that. And so that's where we tend to play, and try to help out in those cases, is facilitating those conversations and trying to help people say, like, look, again, leadership requires sacrifice. A future requires a sacrifice. A future in Christ definitely requires a sacrifice. So what are we leaving? What do we have to leave behind? But more importantly, where are we going? And I think if we just try to rearrange parishes without a sense of where we're supposed to go, I think those efforts generally, that we won't sign up for that. If a bishop has no sense of where he wants to go and he just wants to try to close a parish, like, it's just not where we want to be. If a bishop has a real call to where he wants to lead his people, and that requires some change in parishes, we're all about trying to help him facilitate those conversations. But they are going to be all over the United States and Canada in the next 10 years. Like, if anybody thinks, oh, this is not going to affect us, it absolutely is going to affect everybody in the next 10 years, if it hasn't already. And so we have to kind of really be in touch with, again, what's our identity? What's our mission? What's important here, and who are we to each other, and who is the Lord to us, most importantly, I think.
Amen. Dan, I want to get your perspective on something that I suspect, like, I see it, I speak into it. It's almost like we're not supposed to talk about it. And so feel free to pass.
Great. I love that option.
Fifth Amendment.
Can I phone a friend? Is it a phone a friend situation?
But it's not uncommon for me to see the need in a diocese, and then the resources in terms of the clergy, and then the gap between the clergy's skills, gifts, openness, willingness to learn, and what's going to be required to turn churches around. So I'll often see them make this shift and reorganize, which needs to happen. And then I think to myself right away, I think, what's your plan B? Because about 20% of these churches have a fighting chance, 80% don't. And it's all because of leadership. It's not because they couldn't function if they were well led, but leadership isn't a skill set that we invest in informing people or even recruiting people. Like, and so to me, there seems to be a huge, now again, not that God can't do absolute miracles, because he does, but he often does his best miracles with an openness, a curiosity and passion, and a yes that's ginormous, like a person's individual yes. Like, I don't have the skills, I don't have the capacity, but I have the trust and faith in you, Lord. I'm going to give you my 100% yes, and I'll do whatever it takes. Grow me to be the solution for the situation. I would almost take somebody with no skills with that attitude, because that I can work with. But oftentimes I don't see that. And either does the bishop, and we all know it, but we can't say it. And you look at it, and I think to myself, they're doomed. Like, if I'm not clairvoyant, but I'm not stupid either. And I'm looking at that going, we're in trouble.
No, Rod, I think I think it's doomed, not just because of maybe the lack of capacity or skill set or mindset of our clergy, but even I think our closest people, our closest collaborators as lay people in parishes. Mm-hmm. That is more of my concern, to be honest. yes, father has some work to do, and I think we can put good coaching like you offer and others,
Yep.
around them. I think that helps a lot. But if you can't get the core group of people, not only to be helpful toward vision and future, but to not be entrenched. I mean, and reluctant to change anything. I often tease my mom. I mean, I love my mom. She's a daily communicant. Like she's a great lady, but she was like, we don't have any young people in our parish. And I said, okay, mom, why don't you try offering, instead of the 8 a.m. daily mass in the morning, like offer one in the evening. And she's like, oh, we'll never do that. I don't want to do that. And it's like,
I don't
okay,
want
mom,
to do that.
well, like, come on. And so that creates like a really hard barrier, because those are the folks who are doing the giving. Those are the folks who are spending the time, and God bless them. But they can also become, not my mom, but they could also become barriers to the future if we're not careful. So that's where I feel concerned. I would say overall, I've gotten to a really good place, and maybe I'm just deluding myself, but I think we have to, you kind of described a trend line that's just like tanking, right? And I think you're right. And I think for a long time, my, Dan Cellucci savior complex wanted to be the person or be the ministry to kind of like rest that trend line up.
Yeah.
And I think I've gotten to a place of great peacefulness that I think the Lord is just calling us to start a new trend line. Like, let it fall away.
Yeah.
If it's going to fall away, if it is not of God or it doesn't bear fruit, it will fall away, right? And so what is he calling us to build through us? And we've done these fascinating conversations with people in their 20s and 30s and 40s, some with 2 feet in the church and some with two foot out. And they both say the same thing. They don't see a purpose for a parish. And that sounds sad at first. Mm-hmm. Yet the people who have 2 feet in, they're actually practicing their faith outside of the parish structure, like somewhat despite the parish structure, because that current structure is not offering them a place. So they're meeting in each other's homes. They're forming intentional community. They're going to lots of different churches. They don't mind driving. And I'm like, wow, there's a whole nother reality out there that maybe that's what God's planting, and we just have to kind of allow that to grow. And there'll be a point where those two trend lines intersect. I don't know when that will be. Yeah. But I think we have to be open to that. Like, we're not going to rest. There's so many factors, as you said, generational, financial, whatever you want, that are, we can't stop that trend line, but we can, I think we're called to build maybe a different one.
Amen. Yeah. That's I always think to myself, like, Lord, who are you putting in my life that you're calling me to partner with, to lay my life down with, to discern with, and to be obedient with, to glorify you? Like, who are they? Because that's where I spend all of my time, and because that's where the fruit lies, in relationships with people who are surrendered to Christ, open to the power of the Holy Spirit, and crazy enough to be obedient, to head in a direction that God's calling you. And boy, you stick around with people like that, it's so fun and it's so exciting.
Yeah. And I think about, I think about like the effects of COVID and where we are today. Like, granted, I'm still catching up on the technology, as we discussed earlier, but like clearly, like, you have mastered it because you have like the fancy glow light and the cool microphone, and I feel like I'm flying a plate. But I get, my point is, like, there's what a terrible kind of phase. However, think about how connected you are to so many different leaders now, in a way that maybe you were prior to that. But I think, like, I just find I'm having so many different conversations with other people who have hope and are excited, and they're in France, or they're in, across the country, or they're in Canada, or whatever. And I'm like, gosh, I would have never, this was not my reality before the pandemic. And now it is. Now we're connected in a way. And I'm like, that, I don't know, maybe that's part of God's plan. Like, that we have this network of people, this community, this digital parish around the world, that we weren't aware of before, and God's brought to light the way for us to stay connected. When the maybe ways of connection that we're used to might not be as strong as they were.
Yes, yeah, that's fair. It's true, because we can't. I always say I don't make much of a difference, but I'll lay my entire life down to be obedient. And so whatever God's calling me to, and I always discern that through relationships. Like it's through people, not just ideas. It's through people. And so who's God putting in my life at which times? And can I pay attention to that? And can I be faithful to that? And the answer is yes, of course I can. Of course I can.
Yeah.
And I think that's where God does his best work. But I want to go back for a second, Dan, if I could, because you mentioned, there are things that we just can't stop. Like there's a force going on in culture that if we think we can save it, well, give it a good try for a while, but you're probably going to realize at some point you can't. But you can maybe be aware of some of new things and discern that and be a part of that. That must be hard for bishops.
It is.
Right? Because if you have an innovative pastor willing to try new things, like it's very discouraging oftentimes for that innovative pastor because they're seen as a renegade. You're not Catholic enough. Like, where's your faithfulness? Like, and then the bishop's got to deal with that. And then you can't give that person favoritism because then the old cranky guys will get mad and disengage even more. And it's this whole weird dynamic, I would imagine. But give me some thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think, you know what, in my experience, most bishops, they are grateful for the innovative guys, the guys who are willing to take risks. Their challenge is, and it's real.
Yeah.
They're trying to think about the guy who follows him. So
I know
that's the hardest part, right? It's like
so true.
So they're it's hard enough to figure out who has to go where, and we have statistical proof. It's like the most important decision a bishop will make every year is his assignments.
Yep.
So now you have a guy who has set up a model which he can lead, but maybe the guy who is going to follow him can't lead, and that actually can it sometimes can create more disruption in a bad way because the people become kind of used to it, etc. And so then so he's often, the bishop is tasked with thinking through the long term, right? It's like sometimes at the local level, we want to run a 5K and the bishop is charged with the marathon, right? And so he's trying to run a marathon. Everybody else is trying to run a 5K. And so he's got to kind of pace himself a little bit. And we kind of see that many times as, he's aloof or he's so risk averse. And sometimes that's true.
Sure.
But oftentimes it's a bigger picture that he's trying to keep in his head that only really he sees. Nobody else has access to look at the church, the local church that way in many cases. So I think that's part of the hard part. I think there is a strong risk aversion. And I think there is, again, this reality that everybody wants change until it actually requires something of them.
Yeah.
And he's the recipient of all the angry letters. So, I also, there's one other dynamic that I think we have to remember. And I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I'd be curious. Like, you had some desire, and I would dare say like ambition to do what you're doing. I had some desire or ambition to do what I'm doing, right? And hopefully it's healthy ambition, I wanted to be the CEO of Catholic Leadership Institute, or I wanted to be a leader in this apostolate, right? So I do things and I work to get there. I think our bishops are probably one of the only kind of roles on the face of planet Earth that like 99% of them didn't want to do that. They wanted to be a pastor. They wanted to serve the people of God. Yeah. But many of them did not feel called to the episcopate. And so they are obedient. They are faithful. They are working hard. But they're like, to take one of the hardest jobs on earth that you weren't really looking for.
Yeah, you didn't apply for the job,
and you
right?
plopped in a place that you don't even have control over for some unspecified time that you don't even know that you're going to be there. Maybe.
Yeah.
That's a hard dynamic, right? So I have just great affection and patience for our bishops because I don't think we can really appreciate what that's like.
No.
And it's not what it was back in the 50s or 60s or even 80s or 90s relative to that role. It's a lot more contentious and volatile. And things are coming at you all day, every day, from just a million different places.
Yeah. No, I agree. It is a tricky job, and I too find they're unbelievably open. Yeah. And I think I enjoy any work that I get to do with them because there's often a lot of early wins that are easy to put in place in terms of, because you're getting back to a point you made earlier, Dan, it's like, hey, if we showed up the first day and you meet somebody, you're not going to tell them a hard truth because it's probably not going to go very well. You have to build up some relational equity. Right. And so often bishops are so much coming at them everybody has expectations of what they should do, that they don't have any clear structure with which to invest intentionally in key people so that they can build up that relational
Right.
equity and get that feedback loop. And that's not hard to do. And so it's actually quite easy to put those things into place around structure, and then to be able to understand what are our core values, what's our core purpose, and then live that out through your structure. Like those are not hard wins, and they go a lot further than people think they will. Because if you think you're going to get the head of the whirlwind of ministry as a bishop or as a pastor,
Yep.
you won't. Like that's a never ending battle, and it's okay. It's important. We need to keep maintenance going. We need to live up to some of our responsibilities, but not necessarily all the ones that people think we should live up to.
Yeah, and I've been really blessed to the last couple of years to just have a really great leadership team myself, and I
Right.
feel like I'm always conscious of trying to steward it as best as I can,
Mm.
because it's hard to be a leader. It's hard to take kind of the risks that you need to take for the gospel, but it's much easier to do it when you have people in your corner,
Yeah.
and people who know you, and people who can say like, you all right? Like, you need people who might just call you to say like, hey, you seemed off in that meeting, or
Yeah.
that must be hard for you, or and so I've really come to appreciate that, the value even more. It's always been something
Beautiful.
that we've teached and promoted like you do, but
Yeah.
I think until you live it a little bit,
Yeah.
and live the fruits of it, I think it brings on a whole different life of how important it is.
Amen. Amen. And I know for me too, I'd say the same thing, Dan. And for me, I just got this revelation. There's a beautiful wood trail right by my house. And I was by myself hiking and just having a great old time when the Holy Spirit smoked me with an idea. And I just stood there in the woods, and 25 years just flashed before my mind, and everything was crystal clear. I love when that happens. It doesn't happen often enough.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, then I come back and it's like, I want to submit that for discernment to the leadership team without any strings attached. Like, I'm not going to hold it. I'm not going to jam it through. I'm not
yeah,
going to say, I'm the boss. It's like, no, I think this is revelation. I think it came from Christ. I want to discern this with you. And it's okay. Like, give me your honest feedback. Because if it's a bad idea, I need people around me to say, Ron, no,
yeah,
that wasn't God, dude. Like, you're
yeah,
crazy. You got to stop that thinking. It's like, thank you.
yeah, yeah.
Right, but it's
No,
but
right.
it's helpful for that too, isn't it?
Yes, because again, we can fall into the trap as leaders. I think particularly it's really dangerous, in these types of roles.
Mm.
The first time I ever went to spiritual direction, it was because I was working on a project, and it didn't. I wasn't the CEO, but I was working
Right.
on this project. It didn't go well. Actually, the bishop yelled at me, and I cried. I mean, like, I literally sat in my car and cried, and it was this like, Dan, the weight of the church is on your shoulders, and like,
Right.
you've messed this up, right? So I went to spiritual direction, and within like 4 seconds, the spiritual director was like, brought me to the temptation of Jesus in the desert, and he
Right.
said, Dan, each of those times, the devil was trying to say, prove it. And each of the times Jesus pointed to the Father. And so he said, if you're trying to prove something, it is not of God. If you're trying to be faithful, then it's of God. And so I think as leaders, we have to have that litmus test, like,
Mm.
because the ego can start to inflate, right? You're on a
Mhm.
Ron Huntley podcast, and now you're a big deal. So
Yeah,
now you've arrived.
that's the
So
standard.
now I walk out of here and I start dictating things because I think I'm something special because I was on Ron
Yeah.
Huntley's podcast, and so then you can lose yourself, I think,
Yeah.
very quickly,
Yeah.
and that's dangerous. And so you need a good group of people where they can say like, hey, like, you got to check yourself here. Like, this is
Amen.
not, you're not thinking through this.
That's so beautiful. I did I'd often use APES to talk about people's
Mhm.
charisms, and apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher from Ephesians chapter 4. And but I'd also, in that, I would talk to priests, a group of priests, and I would say, if you're wildly successful in 5 years, what's the headline that the Vatican's writing a newsletter about your area, and what's the subheading? And so and I'd say, what are the three biggest obstacles from getting there? And every time, bar none, Dan, I'm talking bar none, everywhere around the world, one of those three, if I was talking to a group of priests, and again, they're doing it individually, is always the people don't want it. They're just not committed enough. They don't want it. And it's like, okay, fair enough. And I also do the exact same thing with lay people. And so I asked them the exact same question. 5 years, wildly successful. They're writing a column on you. What's the title? What's the subtitle? But what are the three biggest obstacles? And inevitably, every single time, bar none, one of those three is, yeah, the pastor doesn't want it. And I always make a joke. It's like, it's funny because I just talked to them and they said, you don't want it. And then I talk to you and you say they don't want it. It's like we're at the Tower of Babel and we're talking over each other and around each other. But if we start I think I believe, maybe I'm delusional, but I truly believe that inside of people is this earnest desire for greatness for Christ, like this incredible fruitfulness for the kingdom of God. I believe that with all my heart. And yes, there's things that complicate that belief, or you might have to dig a little bit. But I really believe that that's at the heart of 95% of the baptized Christians in the world. And so I think leadership is about recognizing there's probably some layers on top of that. But if the pastor or the bishop and his team can work together, knowing that's our reality, it's okay. That's actually normal. But if we can peel that stuff back skillfully, while building trusting relationships and uncover that thing, I get so excited about what's capable for a diocese or a parish. But those layers of stuff that make it look like people don't care, or they're not interested, or they don't have time, I don't believe that's true.
No,
I absolutely don't believe that's true.
And I guess, Ron, at a basic level, like, so what difference does it make if they don't want it? Don't we want it for them? Like, don't we want it for them? Can't we? I go to what is it, Peter? Like, always have reason for your hope. Always be ready to give reason for your hope, which presumes that we're walking around in a way that people are like, wow, like, why is Ron so hopeful? Like, that's weird. But like, they're going to ask the question, I want what he wants or he has. And how do I get that? How do I get that? They might not know they want it. And they might be giving lots of signs that they don't want it.
Right.
But we want it for them. We know what a life in Christ will do for them. And we can't help but share that. So okay, if they don't want it, but we're not going to stop sharing it. I think we fall into this like consumer reality kind of mindset where it's like, are we running Walmarts or are we the Roman Catholic Church of Jesus Christ? Like, it's like we can't help but share who Christ is to us, what Christ is doing in our lives. And if they want it or not, okay, they have a choice to make, but our choice is whether or not we extend an invitation by way of our discipleship. And I think we always have to make that choice, regardless of if they appear to want it or not.
Amen. And when we get that right as an organization, whether it's a parish or a diocese, if we get that piece right, then we can start acting, behaving, and speaking with unified language and making goals and plans so that even in the midst of dissension, even in the midst of misunderstandings, we continue to try to win more and more people over to a direction. And it's always, I always feel we're more likely to unite around mission than we are around preferences. And so what is our mission? And I always think to myself, it's making new disciples. Capital N, capital E, capital W. And if you're not measuring that and you're not holding yourself accountable to it, you're probably just catechizing, offering some nice, safe things and being nice to people, and you're probably not making any new disciples.
Yep.
In which case you're going to just get buried in preferences.
Well, yeah, or we're just reorganizing disciples. Like, we're just put them here, put them there, put them, connected. Yeah, I my best friend is a priest, and he's a very effective pastor. And every year, he brings 50 or 60 adults into the church at Easter.
That's awesome. I love it.
It's awesome. It's awesome.
I got to meet that guy.
He's awesome. And I was asking him just 2 weeks ago, I was with him, and I said, like, because he just is doing it intuitively. He's not, he's very intentional, but and I said, like, I was like, no, stop. Like, what are you, like, what's your, and his response was exactly what you just said. Everything in the parish has to be oriented to making new disciples. And that's like that's the core, the foundation. Right. Every decision he makes, is this going to help us make new disciples or not? And he's very comfortable, saying farewell to a staff person, hiring a staff person, even if he doesn't have the money, making it, whatever it is, he's okay as long as he can answer that question. Is this going to help us make new disciples? Do I feel like this is going to help us make new disciples? So I I couldn't agree more. I think if we don't have that, and we have, again, this research, 700,000 Catholics, we asked them to rank for their faith community the values that are most important:
Yep.
access to the sacraments,
Yep.
family focus, social justice,
Bible
whatever.
studies. Yep.
Yeah, nine or 10 things. Sharing the faith with others never gets in the top 5.
No.
And I'm like, well, there you go. Like, never gets in the top 5. Like, so how is that not anywhere on our radar? And it's not. Like, qualitatively, quantitatively, I can demonstrate to you, in your average parish in the United States, at least, it's not on anybody's radar.
No.
And I think, wow, like, if we're not existing for that purpose, what are we doing? You know?
Preach it, brother. That's exactly. We're literally just launching a course called the evangelization parish evangelization course for leaders, for that very reason, because even people that are doing it, you get stuck, and it's actually for people that have been doing it. It's not a beginner's course, and it's because you get stuck. But a lot of it has to do with the things that we've talked about today: vision, investing in people, structure, like all these other things, so that we're aligned for impact. It's it's like you see sometimes somebody. They hire you. We don't, like your mom's parish, for example. We don't have any young people. Oh, we need to hire a youth leader. So they hire a youth leader, and it's like, how come you're not doing anything? It's like, we have to own. We as a parish have to have a vision for young families and young people. It's not like you hire a youth minister and all your problems go away. It's like, no, you don't. But
my wife's a big runner. I'm not, but there's this like county program where you can get your kids to run races, and so they do it in a different county. Yeah, it's cute, and so whatever. We went on a Sunday afternoon to the one nearest us, and I mean every young family in our area was there, like everybody, And so I walk up to a tent because there was soft pretzels, which is like a gold in Philadelphia. It's a soft pretzel. And my kids were like, "Can we have soft pretzels?" It was a Protestant church that was handing out soft pretzels, and I was like, "I'm Catholic. Like, may I have a pretzel?" And they were like, "Yeah, go ahead." Like, and they had games for the kids, and so I felt like guilty taking their pretzels, so I was like, "I'm going to ask you about your church." They were open for a year, and the 2 women that were staffing this tent are full-time volunteers to run the youth program, and I said, "Wow, like for 30 or 40 hours a week, they're helping bring youth in, run activities." And I said, "So you came here just to stand here?" And she goes, "This is where our people are. Where else would we be?" Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, and I have a great parish, but I was like, we would never have a tent and pay for soft pretzels if it was not like physically on our campus.
Yeah.
And
we had a mass beforehand,
right? And we
confession,
and we could guarantee that there would be I was like, the thinking though, they were like, this is where we have to be because this is where people are, and I was like, wow, like that. It was inspiring to me, and it was very challenging. I was like, are we willing to kind of go to places where it's not our campus and take the parish out to the community, which is really what it is.
Wow. So beautiful. Dan, it's so fun talking to you. Honest to goodness, I could talk to you for like weeks. Like you're just a joy. People have been watching this. You've been watching me get mentored in real time, and it's true. Like just your wisdom, your passion, your desire, what you've learned, how you continually lay that down at the feet of Jesus and His church. Dan, I'm so grateful for you, your team, your vision, and what you do for the church, man. Thank you.
Well, likewise, Ron, I appreciate it. We need to, this age is going to be defined by heroic witness, and I consider you one of those people. So I'm grateful to have your witness, to be able to benefit from it, and now to be able to brag that I've been among the select few who've been able to don my dorky earphones and.
We got to lend those earphones to your 82-year-old founder. I'd love to get him on here. He sounds like just a great guy.
He'd probably be better with the technology than I would, because he's up to snuff. But yes.
Listen, for those that I just want to send our listeners to CLI just to do some exploring, and what would give us some insight into how they could best do that.
Yeah, probably the best way is catholicleaders.org. That's our website. We have on there different resources, thought leadership pieces. I do a weekly reflection that's basically how I screwed up in leadership the week before, and what I learned from it, or tried to learn from it. So you can sign up for that. But that's probably the best place to start, catholicleaders.org.
That's wonderful.
Thanks, Ron.
That's wonderful. You're welcome. And so thank you for listening to this podcast, folks. It's great to have you on this journey. I know how much you care about Jesus, his church, and that you're on mission. And I'd really encourage you to connect with CLI and Dan and follow and listen and grow. Because, I was talking to somebody the other day, talked about a course. I was talking about this course that we're doing on evangelization for parish leaders. And he said, well, do we really need another course? Like, I don't know of any one course that's ever made me a different person. But my answer to him was, it wasn't, which meal did your mother cook you that made you so healthy? It probably wasn't one. It was probably a collection of eating well over time. And if you're on this leadership journey, we're constantly consuming and looking for mentors and people we can grow from. So I encourage you to connect with Dan and continue to do what you do. Thank you. And we'll see you next time. I want to encourage you, as you lead this week, be faithful to God and generous to others. See you next time, and remember, if you're still breathing, you are powered for impact.